for joining us again for another edition of our Black Latina Summit. Just to give a little bit of background, my name is Crystal Shanice Roman, and I am the CEO and founder of the Black Latina movement, which was a theater company, theater, film, TV, web company we created in New York City 12 years ago to provide a voice for women in theater and film, in front and behind the camera, that didn't have that space 12 years ago. We've been going 12 years strong. And so we decided to create the summits. Obviously, due to COVID, we weren't able to have any kind of live events anymore. But we wanted to stay authentic and true to who we are and still make it about, our people, for us, things that matter to us, topics and discussions that are really important to us as people of color. And so we've talked about loss in COVID. We've talked about women's health, mental health, beauty, education, with everything that's going on with schooling for parents. And so we decided, we took a break in July, and we thought about what the next topic was going to be. And there was a lot of things that were going on, obviously, in our world that made me think about giving it up for the men. So if you know anything about Black Latina movement and any of our productions, we're very female driven. And we don't really do stuff pertaining to Black Latinos, only because as women, we all know that we've been very repressed, and we're never on the forefront of things. And so for us, we don't really do productions that cater to the male experience, the female experience. And men can come to our shows, but it's mainly about what our voice is. And what propelled me to change that was to say, we do have a lot of amazing allies and men. Men are not always the bad guy, or not always necessarily, the enemy, and a lot of times you do have Latinos who, and all types of men who hold us back as women in all different fields and in our different genres, whether it's theater, whether it's the medical industry. Women are always kind of repressed or oppressed. But I realized that a lot of men also too are our allies, and I didn't want to completely shun away the men. So after 12 years, I feel it's time for us to kind of create this connection with our men. And so I have 3 guests today that I know personally. We've had long-standing relationships, and I'm just supporting the movement for so many years. And another reason why I decided to bring them on. And just a lot of the things that have been going on with Latinos, with Black Latinos in the media, things that have been said about whether it was the Black Lives Matter movement, whether Latinos feel like who they are as Black people in those kind of realms, what's going on in the media, all the talk about the Emmys and, Latinos weren't represented, and all these different topics were coming up. And so I felt compelled to kind of say, you know what, it's time for me to bring on the fellas so they could talk and they could give their voice and their opinion to what's really going on. So before we begin, though, I want to say, if you have any questions, any comments, any concerns, you just want to, yes, amen, thank you, whatever it is, always feel free to chat in the chat room, because everyone, as you can see, is muted. There may be a time that I'll unmute everyone and then you can speak to the guests. But for now, if you have anything, I will look into the chat and let the men know what your opinions are, what you feel, what questions you have as we go through the forum. So without further ado, I want to introduce the men to you. I have some really great friends here. And so I'll start introducing them to you all. So first off, we have Alcides Martin. Right, Alcides? Did I say your last name right?
Marte, like Tuesday in Spanish. Except, hold the S.
Okay. So I have Alcides Marte. He is a 7th year teacher at the Harriet Tubman Chapter School in South Bronx. He is currently attending the School of Education in City College of New York to attain his bachelor's in special education. He's a native New Yorker and a first-generation American with both parents hailing from the Dominican Republic. Welcome, Alcides.
Well, thank you, Crystal, for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm
And
excited.
wait, I'm sorry to cut you off. Doesn't really matter, but I guess it was. I'll say it later.
No,
No
go ahead,
worries.
say it now. No, say it now, please.
No, because just in case somebody wanted to actually look it up, it's Harry Tubman Charter School. Yeah, it's a charter school in the Bronx. And then my name is it's a master's because I have my BA in teaching and education. So
No, and
yes,
that's important. Definitely, say it.
yeah.
Say it. Is there anything you wanted to say in addition? Did I leave anything out?
No, you pretty much got it all. I'm just excited to speak. Honestly, I'm ready to get into the questions because I've been promoting this, and this is something if you know me personally, this is something that is near and dear to me. I'm passionate. Those who know me know that I speak about this a lot on social media, Instagram. So just thank you for having me, and any questions, I'm ready.
Thank you. Okay, so that's one of our amazing Black Latinos. Then we have William Garcia Medina. He is a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies at the University of Kansas. Garcia Medina's research currently focuses on Black ethnics and the construction of social reproduction of Black American racial identity discourse in the public humanities. In 2016, he earned an MA in Curriculum and Instruction from Teaching College, Columbia University in New York City, with a focus on historical literacies in elementary schools. Garcia Medina also has an MA in History from the University of Puerto Rico, Rencito del Rio Prellas. My Spanish is terrible.
Perfect.
But thank you for coming, William. Anything you wanted to add into that as well?
Oh, kind of like I see, I'm also really passionate about these conversations as well. I'm really excited to have been given the opportunity to partake in this convo. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
And you know what's so funny is that we've all been following each other for a long time on social media and knowing each other for a while. So yeah, I love it. Okay, and so our third amazing Black Latino is Omar Martinez. He has a Bachelor's of Art in African American Studies from the University of Maryland, Master's in Educational Leadership, American Intercontinental University. Currently is part-time PhD student in American Studies at the University of Maryland, College Point. He's an Assistant Division Chief of Historical Resources, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Nature and Historical Resource Division, Prince George County Park and Recreation. He has a leading role in racial equality organization with like Museums and Race, Transformation and Justice, Museum Hughes, as well as part of the Museum at Site for Social Action Project. Thank you, Omar, for joining us.
Hola, ¿cómo están? It's good to see everybody. I'm glad that you guys are here. I'm hyped about this conversation. This is something that obviously is central to our positionality and our identity, and want to continue to build coalition around it instead of creating separation like the dominant culture has taught us to do. So whatever we can do to disrupt that separation, let's do it here today.
Yes. So we have some people that are saying yes, the Bronx, and that Martha Morena Vega has launched this call for racial, cultural, and economic equality for our communities and arts and culture. And they shared it. So thank you for sharing that with us. So we want to start by just a little bit of background. And so let's start off by, and whoever wants to start the conversation, you can start it. But we wanted to talk about what does it mean to be a Black Latino for you, growing up versus now with your experience? Who wants to kick it off?
Okay, I mean, I guess I'll go first.
Okay.
But to be honestly, a few years ago, when I was growing up, like I was 10, 15 years old, if you told me what is a Black Latino, I would just, what, is that a toy? Is that a TV show? Where can I get it? But now, like growing up, I wasn't told, you know, I wasn't told you're black, you know, you grow up being myself, I'm Dominican. But like speaking from a specific experience, I didn't really identify as black because, you know, being Dominican, you're not really told, you know, that you're black. You're either what's to say, like they look at you according to your skin tone. So you're like they say Indio, you know, Indian. But I didn't really know what it was to be black. And then mind you, my father is darker than me, you know, and he didn't identify as black. He didn't really know what that was. But I guess to answer your question, what it means to be like back then, my dad would like one time I wanted to do braids and he said, no, that's for morenos. And it's like, but dad, look at you, you know? So back then I didn't know what that was, but now for me, it's to be a Black Latino now, it's like creating an archetype of, okay, this is a black man that, you know, he speaks Spanish. You know, when I speak to my children, my kindergartners, they're like, you know, I tell them, do you know that there are black people that speak Spanish? And they look at me like, you know what? These are 5-year-olds, but you know, they're still learning. So for me, it's about the representation, period. We need to just build that, like establish that archetype of, you know, black people speaking Spanish. So it's not so much of a, you know, like it doesn't throw people off, or we don't try to get erased as I feel like they're doing right now.
Do you feel that it was hard to kind of create that space for yourself, like as you transitioned with your family or like your friends? Did you feel like you got like backlash because of that growing up?
I mean, growing up, it was you weren't really told that at all. But in terms of like when I said that I wanted to do the braids, you know, my dad said that that's for black people, that's for morenos. That was something that I didn't really understand. But now growing up, you know, doing much more reading, and you know, you see that sadly we've been duped. So,
oh yeah.
But
in the chat room, they're saying once Nilda said, I once found an academic essay from Dominican scholar entitled "Making Indians Out of Blacks," to your point. And Esther said, agreed with Alcides, and even more difficult to navigate when you're half Haitian. It's true.
Ooh.
It's true.
Ooh, yes.
It's
That's
true.
another one.
It's true.
Ooh.
So,
by the way,
go ahead.
No. I just wanted to wish my Haitians happy Hispaniola Independence Day. Was it the Haitian Revolution was 1821, like years ago. You know that they were trying to fight for the whole island. So what's up to my Haitians?
That's
right.
Right.
What's up?
It's true. So William, how was it for you growing up a Black Latino versus now?
Yeah, well, similar to Alcides, my dad is black, you know, and so my dad is the black man, you know, he comes from a Santurce, like a very black area in Puerto Rico, you know, more like the metropolitan San Juan area. That's where he's from. And he never instilled any pro-black anything to us growing up, you know. All his wives were always white or light skinned, you know. He didn't like getting called Dominican, you know, because we get called Dominican a lot, you know, when we're growing up. So as a young person, I didn't know anything about black. I mean, my understanding of blackness is black was Black American, you know, the Fresh Prince. I don't, you know, the family, you know, Black American was black to me. I didn't really know anything else. And even when we went back to Puerto Rico, I thought that it was gonna be an island full of Tainos. I was like 9, 10. I'm like, there's gonna be a bunch of Tainos there making a fire or something like that. So I didn't even know there was black people on the island. So yeah, I didn't literally like, and when I was a kid, I also tried to like make my hair even straighter as it is already, you know, and I actually burned my forehead a little bit because I was trying to straighten my hair. Wow. Because I grew up watching blackface in Puerto Rico. Like there's a lot of blackface, which I've written about. And so and you have like an all black Puerto Rican group playing, you know, bomba music, Afro Puerto Rican music, and a white Puerto Rican actor with green eyes making fun of black people. So I'm like, if these black people are okay with it, it must be okay. Like, if you know, and so it was just like that. So I ended up, my dad was kind of a player, you know, and again, he never talked about blackness, pro-black, anything, you know? So, so I ended up in a group home when I was 14 in New York. My dad died of drugs, and My mom was also getting Hep C. So I grew up in an orphan in New York, and I grew up with a bunch of black boys from when I was 14 to like when I was 20. And so my experience with Black Latinidad is being in a group home with a bunch of black boys. We were under the water of the state, you know, and so it was really confusing for everybody because a lot of our understanding of blackness came from BET. Because there was no social media back then, so a lot of the stuff that we understood as black, you know, came from black entertainment. I mean, not that we didn't go around. It's not like we didn't buy Jamaican bootlegs off Jamaican dudes, you know, in Brooklyn, but like a lot of our understanding of blackness came from BET and the media, you know what I mean? And so it was a very confusing time. Like Big Al, who was a supervisor, he's like, I was saying like Sam Cooke. He's like, stop singing that, you're not black. So I see it was talking about his household, saying that you're not black. I grew up in a group home with different kind of black people being told I'm not black. So it was a little different, I guess, in my way. And so, but the funny thing is we had two staff members in the group home who were Garifuna, who were Honduran, and they were both black. One is called Ben, and his brother I used to call Biggie Smalls because he looked just like him. I don't remember. I don't know if that's inappropriate right now, but that's what I call it. You know, they look. And Ben would talk to me in Spanish, and everybody in the group home would be like, "Oh, confused." Literally, everyone in the group home would be mad confused because it's like, this is clearly a black man called Ben, you know, and this is a black man. You know, he could tell he's a native New Yorker talking Spanish. You know, his brother didn't really talk too much Spanish, but Ben, and then people in the group home looked at me weird, like, that's confusing. And so it was a lot of confusing around who was black, but I didn't have a black Latino figure in the United States. Like Tego Calderon was a black Puerto Rican figure, but we didn't have a black Latino US figure. You know what I mean? So you're either black American or you're black from somewhere else. So it's like, my thing is like, I'm black by, you know, my understanding of blackness is you're either black American or you're black in the, you know, Jamaica, somewhere in Jamaica, or you're black in Puerto Rico, but you can't be black Latino here because it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So I have always understood my blackness to be different from black Americanness and from Caribbeans too. So I was always, my understanding of blackness is I'm black in Puerto Rico. Like the whole blackness is over there. And that's where I guess where my grandma's from and my dad's from. So I never really associated black Latino identity in the US. It was just, it's not something that my brain wrapped itself around, you know? So yeah, I mean, that's kind of, you know, in a nutshell, what my experience in a group home. That's not everybody's experience, but I grew up without parents and I grew up in a group home where everybody, and then black Latinos were kind of categorized as non-black. So we had to fight a lot in a group home. Like, you know, we had to like pop off a lot more, you know, because we're on black enough. And, you know, like light-skinned Puerto Ricans are pop off more to prove their masculinity, you know, all that kind of stuff. But my understanding of blackness is like, I'm black, but I'm black from somewhere else. My blackness has nothing to do with, and then years later, I learned about Puerto Ricans who played in the Negro Leagues. I learned about James Europe, and I learned about black Puerto Ricans who were part of the Harlem Hellfighters. Then I learned about Schomburg, and I'm like 23 at that point. You know, I'm a grown person at a university. I didn't know that, and nobody in that group home knew that. And I just want to emphasize that nobody in that group home knew anything about black history beyond what we think we knew and about what BET was telling us, and you know, media industry. So it was a lot of confusion as to who's black, and that's kind of my story there, you know.
That's awesome. Omar, the same for you. How was it growing up as a black Latino versus now in your identity?
I think for me, where it might be a little bit different compared to Alcides and William, is that I grew up in the DC metropolitan area. Yeah. So there's always as many things are problematic, you know, in New York around identity, because I did live in New York later on in life. You know, the erasure of Afro-Latinidad in DC was at a different level because it's such a prominent African-American space. Like, it's Black Americans in this area there's different social strata. You have people here who, you know, you get a lot of people who went to Howard University, Bowie State, Coppin State. Some of them went to University of Maryland and other local universities, and they settle here. So there's a huge presence in the suburbs of DC of African Americans, and so you see, you know, blue collar workers. You see people who live in like in project-like situations, and you see people who have a whole lot of money, right? In Prince George's County, the county I live in now, still um, um, resembles that. And I say that to say is because what I always tell people is that when I grew up, my Puerto Rico was the four walls of my house. But when I stepped outside of the house, like it was not Puerto Rico no more. But inside my house, you know, it was Fania All Stars. It was La Loca con la Bichuela. You know, it was all that stuff. You know, everybody was speaking Spanish, and everybody was black, right? So that was my reality. So the idea of creating a black identity as a Puerto Rican was always interesting for me. I think the other thing was that when it's still on my social security card, my birth name is Omar Eaton. At high school, my parents were like, okay, you get ready to go to college. And so we're going to, since in Puerto Rico, we always hyphenate our names anyway. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hyphenate your name because you know your mother's surname is Spanish and people will recognize that. And then when you apply for schools or for scholarships, they're going to give you that, you know, that affirmative action type of love, right? And so, okay, you know, and that's all. And my parents were both college educated, but they were educated in Puerto Rico, so they didn't have to deal with that. So they had no idea, you know, how to deal with that in the States. And so we were like, okay, well, so I hyphenated my name and I started doing all that. And I remember, because I remember going to University of Maryland my freshman year, I stayed in the dorms. And, you know, and I hung around mostly African Americans. The Latino population at that time was really small, almost non-existent. It was mostly people Latin America coming directly from another country to go to school there. But when people grew up here in the States. And so I was noticing like all my black friends would be getting like mail from like the Black Student Union, and I'm looking at my mailbox, I don't get nothing, and I'm looking, and then once in a while I get this one little thing from the Hispanic Heritage Union, which had like 2 people in it, and I was wondering why, and I realized that when I signed up and I applied and I put down my identity, I put in an other. And I put in, I don't know what I put, Black Puerto Rican, Puerto Rican Black, something like that. And I'm sure they chose for me, right? Because they didn't have a box to recognize my identity at all. And so they probably chose for me to fulfill whatever quota that they were trying to fulfill that was government enforced. And so, you know, that's been my reality. And of course, growing up in this area in the, you know, in the 80s where there was a heavy influx of Central Americans, mostly from El Salvador. And so that complicated the idea of what it is to be Latino or Hispanic, whatever label people were trying to impose upon us. And so when I come in and I start speaking Spanish with my English surname, people were just like, what is this? You know, I mean, it was like a hand that flew out of my shoulder. How could you know? Like almost like I had no right to know how to speak Spanish. I had no right to know how to connect with them. Now, meanwhile, all the while, my parents were born and raised in San Dulce, Puerto Rico. They came here in the '60s.
My dad's from there. Yeah.
My father was recruited to work at NASA as an engineer. My mother worked 34 years in DC public schools, and the only bilingual school that existed at the time. Now we got plenty of them. And so we were always embedded in the community because my father was one of the first people recruited for University of Puerto Rico to work in NASA. And since then, literally since then, which is 1966 up to 2020, they have been recruiting from that school, which is the campus at Mayagüez, right? People who go to the University of Puerto Rico know that system, the campus at Mayagüez is like the A&M. It's like the technical campus for all the engineers and scientists go to school for the most part. And so because of that, at his work, he had a Latino community that was mostly Puerto Rican, and in my mother's jobs, a lot of the teachers, although the students and the people around there were from Central America, a lot of the teachers were Puerto Rican because the early movement of Puerto Ricans in the DC area, probably prior to the '60s, had some stalwart people like Carlos Rosario, who was an activist and a leader in the community. There's actually a school named after him in DC, a public charter school, in fact, is named after him in DC, and he was the one who helped my mother get established. And then the president of that charter school, or the president emeritus now, Sonia Gutierrez, was also Puerto Rican. And so there's always been sort of like a Puerto Rican presence, but it's never been the majority that it is. Like it's never been part of the majority like in New York and part of the tri-state. So that's always complicated my experience growing up as a Black Latino.
I love it.
Hey, Crystal, I had a side comment, and I forgot to say this real quick. I was talking about the group home life, and I wanted to say though that everything wasn't always negative. You know what I mean? Because I don't think Black communities are like homogenous or good. It's always good, bad, and ugly. Because Big Al, he's from New York, he's from Staten Island, but his parents came from the South, and he used to, Big Al, may he rest in peace. He used to wake us up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he used to make his famous blueberry pancakes. You know what I mean? So he used to like do oxtail, and we used to watch the new Ja Rule video that came out. So even though I feel like, I mean, I'm not sure that's a good thing or bad.
No, I know.
I'm just saying that a lot of experiences were shared.
Yeah.
In that space, like, and I feel like my experiences there is still a Black space, and I grew up there so from my understanding of Black community is that they're not romantic, they're not good or bad. It's just complex. You know what I mean? And so I had a lot of good times, a lot of laughter in the group home. We always, doing the whole dozens, like, we're always getting on each other, everything ain't bad. It was just, I was in a Black space with a bunch of Black boys from Queens, a bunch of Crips and Bloods, a lot of everything happening. But I still love those blueberry pancakes. Big Al, may he rest in peace. And he got me through high school. He was like, yo, you better get to college and that, so everything wasn't bad. I was always want to emphasize that there was a lot of things happening in that group home,
Yeah. Let's talk about the climate right now. So there's the temperature's a little mixy with Black Latinos and the climate in which we're in. So let's start off with Black Lives Matter. Let's just jump into it. There's been a lot of discussion about Latinos shouldn't jump on the movement because we should stick to ourselves. The movement doesn't really represent us. We should do our own thing. Brown Lives Matter. We're not a part of that, but the Black community doesn't really embrace Latinos, and so Latinos should just do their own thing. There was a couple of bloggers that had huge opinions about it, and it kind of went super viral. So I just wanted to get you gentlemen's opinion, because at the end of at the heart of it, right, the Black Lives Matter movement is about police brutality and, Black men and women, right, being killed, but the Black male, life, it has not been seen for eons as important, and women as well. And so as Black Latinos, I wanted to know your opinion or your thoughts. There's no right or wrong, obviously, but your opinion or your thoughts about the climate and where Latinos are as far as the movement.
I would say that I believe it's a complete travesty that we have people seeking ways to start different movements without doing the due diligence to create coalition. I think it takes work, right? White dominant culture, white supremacy is set up for us to be separate. And so as soon as we fall into the idea that we have to have a separate movement, they're winning, right? In fact, they might have already won if we don't get too much deeper into it. And so, that's why I love the work that I do as a public historian, working in art and culture, is, bringing to light the history of coalition building that the humanity has generally. For example, if you go back during the colonial days of the Bacon's Rebellion, when the white planter elites of Northern Virginia were taking advantage of all the indentured servants, both Black and white, and they were also taking advantage of the Piscataway nation, and they rallied together to combat and to fight against the white planter elites. And then you look at what's happened in the 60s from the Poor People's Campaign that Dr. King started before he was assassinated. That was the movement he started that Abernathy ended up carrying over because Dr. King was assassinated. If we look at the original Rainbow Coalition, you look at the Lords, the Panthers, there's coalition building. And those things fell apart because the white supremacist structure had to proactively go in there and disrupt that through COINTELPRO and other means of the state. And so when we self-disrupt that, like, it just is very frustrating to hear, because for me, I don't think that person or those people have done any due diligence to even create the coalition, to find common ground. And I can see if you try to find common ground, you try to reach out to people and try to say, hey, I see you're doing a movement, I don't feel included, let's talk. but people are not even doing that. They're trying to call people out on Twitter, and then they're trying to create a new hashtag, a new movement with no due diligence. I'm going to tell you, that's going to be the destruction of us if we don't get that together.
I wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Omar said, in terms of like there's like essentially it's all of our struggle. You know, I'm thinking specifically this during the summer. I live in the Inwood area in Dikeman, and if you all are familiar, in July there was a protest going down through Dikeman, and I remember passing the Dwayne Reed and just seeing a whole bunch of people just organizing, and I'm like, okay, let me make my merry way home because COVID, duh. But then I hear afterwards that there were a bunch of like black gentlemen, like Black Americans, walking past the Dwayne Reed, and then the people that were organized in some of the people that were organized in the Dwayne Reed parking lot, they began to like follow them, and just saying, they were literally telling them, yo, we don't want none of that over here. Take that shit, excuse my language, take that shit over there. Take that shit somewhere else. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Like you're Black, fam. Like, this is just like, there's no other way to say it. Like, you look at each other, and the people that live in Dikeman pretty much all have my skin complexion. They're white Dominicans, they're white Latinos, Black Latinos, etc. But my point is that white supremacy did a number on us, because you're literally trying to tell somebody, you're like targeting somebody, and they haven't done anything wrong. So it's like you're already saying Black is wrong, and there's that. We have to start from there. When you see somebody Black, you have to get out of that notion that they're guilty. That's dangerous. And that's what's keeping a lot of us, just boxed in. Like, even on Cardi, I have to give props to Cardi, because if you all didn't see, she posted a picture of someone took a picture of the protest when they had the Haitian flag and the Dominican flag like together, and Cardi posted it and talked about it, and the Dominicans the native Dominicans at least, they let her have it. They weren't too pleased, and for me, it's just like, she's speaking the truth, and that's why I made a notion to the Haitian Revolution, which was on August 21st, 1821, like pretty much 200 years ago, or 190 years ago. Toussaint Louverture. If I butchered his name, I'm sorry. But he was fighting for the unification of the whole island. So when I say things like, I don't celebrate, February 27th, I don't celebrate independence from colonizers, and people look at me on social media like I'm crazy. It's like, no, Spain wasn't fighting, Spain wanted to get us. They wanted to keep us colonized, Meanwhile, the Haitians was fighting for everybody. But, there's that notion, when you have the elites that, rewrote history, and that's where we are now with Dominicans. So that's why I feel like we need to really just try to disseminate as much information as possible, in hopes that we kind of all get on the same track.
Priscilla says she heard about the Dikeman incident all the way in Los Angeles, which is
wow.
That's insane that it would get, that kind of coverage. And then Pope said, many forget that creating a class system has been based on color was the last gift. It's coming. Last gift left by the colonizers. And then Shirley said the incident got no media coverage. Yeah, it's crazy. That's crazy. William, any thoughts on this?
No, I just want to say I love the comments from both Omar and Rashid. I think they're great comments. My approach is very particular, I guess. I mean, the way I think about it. So I remember when I was young and I was reading Black history by myself, because in Puerto Rico they don't teach Black history of any. If it's not slavery, they're not going to talk about it.
Right.
They don't teach post-slavery Black studies in Puerto Rico. That's never going to. I mean, I'm just kidding. They're trying to make that happen now. But so I was self-taught a lot of. I used to read, George Washington, the Miseducation of the Negro. I was reading Robin D. Kelly's. Orlando Patterson, Slavery and Social Death, all those classics, fantastic. I was reading Native Son, all those great books. And when I was reading that, as someone who grew up in a very complex Black space growing up, I was so hyped up about Black liberation. You know, I really fell in love with the notion of Blackness. I fell in love with the idea of looking at beyond the nation state, looking at beyond, you know, white supremacy, looking at Black, you know, empowerment. I was super, you know, like most of us who read that when we were young, we were all inspired by that, you know. I remember coming to the United States and going to New York, and I was trying to form some coalitions with some folks when I was at Columbia, and then I was trying to like emphasize the Dominican Haitian gap, you know, issue. And I remember some members not really wanting to waste time and energy on that. And I was able to do, Madam Jimenez was there. We created a Black American Afro-Latino event where we could talk about any possible, you know, issues around the Black community. And I was able to host that with Omar and a friend of mine, Andrew Vinales. But I noticed when I got back to the United States that it was very similar to a group home, you know, like that. There's a lot of Black politics happening. Black politics are very complex. And I was asked the same question by NPR like a month ago. And she asked me like, oh, how do you feel the fact that Afro-Latinos are not represented within a Black mainstream audience? And I said, going back to what Omar was saying, my answer to them, to NPR was, I think we have to be in these Black spaces. We have to be in Black spaces. If you want to make the change, you want to talk about Black Latinos or Black immigrants who, there's a Black Muslim family that was literally killed a couple days ago. The whole family was killed by some suspects who set the house on fire, and all the whole family died. Like, there's Black violence against all kind of Black bodies in the United States. If you want to make that case, you need to be in Black spaces. And I know that's not easy to do. I know that's very complicated. I know that going in there and doing the work that Omar's doing is very difficult, because even a couple of years ago, I was like, you know, I'm tired of Afro-Latinos not having a mainstream audience. I'm tired of having to go to college and be in 24 and learn about Afro-Latinos. And I think we should just do our own thing. I said that once, and I fell for that trap too. I'm gonna be very honest. I fell for that trap. And my boy Cesar Vargas, and he was like, that's not the correct approach, you know. And it took me years to say that that's not okay, because going back to what Omar is saying, that's like, we're all struggling for citizenship. You know, it's like a struggle for citizenship. And what I like to do is focus on Black politics. Is very complicated. So I like to focus on what are the issues, you know, what are the politics that doesn't allow us to come together and form coalition, going back to what Omar was saying. So I focus on what are the politics that is affecting us from coming together and creating a massive coalition. You know, so I think about like Black Puerto Ricans like Arturo Schomburg, who was a Black Puerto Rican, you know, in Harlem, who was who didn't really teach his kids Spanish, who had to negotiate with his Blackness. You know, I like thinking about what are the politics. So right now I focus on Black nativism, not only in the United States, but Black nativism in any country, really. Like what is the main idea of Blackness? So I think that for me, the solution is more to look at what are the politics of making sure that Black people from different backgrounds don't come together. You know, what is happening? What are the politics at play? You know, how are white folks responsible for that too, right? So one of the things that I like to focus on is like Florida. Florida has a history of Black history before, you know, before 1619. And I like to focus on Black history that goes beyond the nation state. You know what I mean? And so I think that going back to my understanding of Black neighborhoods is like, it's very complex. You know what I mean? And so we have to, those of us that care about Black unity, we have to be in Black spaces. And it's a difficult process. It is.
And I love that. You know why? Because not to cut you off, but you said something that's so important to me, because so the second half of the question was going to talk about the media. And the reason why I say that is because when the Emmys had came out, really big, prominent Latinos, which is no point in me saying their name, but were coming out and saying that Latinos got snubbed for the Emmys and that they weren't included in the Emmys. And for me, I felt like there was a shirt that Issa Rae had wore. I don't know if it was the Oscars or one of the shows where it was like, I'm rooting for everyone Black.
Made
And
black.
to me,
Yeah,
it was like,
that's dope.
as long as we got a vote in and there were, black people, when I say black people, I mean all of us in, it was like, who cares what color of black it was? And I get that Latinos, we have so much pride, we have so much love and passion in who we are, but it's like when you start to do that, it becomes divisive. So as someone who's in the entertainment industry, it's like, if I see color, it's like, we winning. I'm there. I'm at the table, because it's like, So for me, when it started to come up with the Emmys, it was like, well, what do you mean? Latinos have always had their shows. Latinos have always, because you could, and not in a derogatory way, but a lot of Latinos always pass for white anyway. So they always were getting the roles from very early on. So you've been winning. So now let's give our sisters and our brothers in darker tones that are now getting these roles, let's prop them up, let's boast them up, because they weren't getting that before. Now all of a sudden it's an issue, but it wasn't an issue before. Right. And so I kind of want to bring that into the conversation too. It's really not fair, especially in entertainment. And I wanted any of you guys or all of you to kind of, dive into that as well, like representation in the media.
I just wanted to, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Alcides. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I wanted to just jump in real quick because piggyback off your point, Crystal, because we tend to do this when maybe not us, but other people, when we're talking about being Black, we do this thing where we divide ourselves. It's the othering. So to say, like I said, I post a lot on social media, and my cousin, I have a lot of family in DR, obviously. Most of my family is from the Dominican Republic, from the capital, Herrera. And, when my cousins see that I post a lot about, just the, Dominican Haiti relations, one of my cousins in particular, my oldest cousin, he I don't know if he gets up in arms, but he says, es que esa gente esa gente son rara, and esa gente. In English, that's, those people, so it's like that right there. You hear the mindset of just like we're speaking like white people, there's you're referring to a group of people as savages just because of what you've been taught. Right. And that's why we have to stop that othering. Like when Black people win, that's why I'm always, I'm always rooting, because it's part of our struggle. We have a long way to go. So when I see somebody like Issa Rae, I'm clapping, I'm showing support. I don't care. Look at Telemundo. I mention them all the time whenever they seem to not care. And I'm still waiting for them to, show people that look like me on Telemundo Univision, which is why I don't watch it. But
that's right. Yeah.
So we have to create, like I was saying earlier, the archetype of what it is to be a Black Latino, Black Latina. And when we're, around our fellow Black friends and family members, and Latino friends and family members, whoever speak Spanish, being Dominican, my mom, she busted her behind trying to get me into a good school, and successfully. But when I would come home, none of that English. Aquí se habla en español. And thanks to her, I was able to retain a part of, my identity because of her in this country where, that pushes you to, be straight, be slim. It's pretty much a box. When I think of America, there's a certain box that we have to kind of be put in. So we have to stop doing the other.
Yeah, I was gonna say what I always think about Black Latinidad is people who are the triple consciousness, right? The people who talk about so I like to think about Black Latinos as people who are Black, who are in the Black community, whether you're in a group home or or you're in DC, or you're somewhere, or you're Latino in that kind of politic, that you're kind of within that U.S. politic of whatever that word means. And so what I know about Black Latino politics in general is that there's a lot of emphasis on both, but I feel I could talk about my family members who hate that I talk about pro-Black stuff, they literally hate that. I have cousins who don't even talk to me because I've had to do pro-Black stuff. So what I've seen throughout the years about Black Latinidad is that we kind of are more vocal about Latino issues, and because if we don't do it, nobody, we have to. Like that's just like what we got to do. But I feel like the harder part for us is the Black part, where we have to kind of go in Black spaces, and that's the part where we kind of start threading. We start walking a little carefully, because because Blackness is such an important concept for people, and so nobody wants to break the concept of Blackness. It's this idea that has been fought for so long, the idea of Blackness, and nobody wants to break it. It's just like like Blackness is like the sacred idea of that. It's important. And so I always emphasize both the Black politics and also the Latino politics. And I think they're both very difficult to navigate, and I think that we have to be in both, we have to infiltrate those spaces and do what we think will help build coalition,
I'm gonna ask Omar if you have anything to add to that.
Sure. I'll start off by saying, as we talk about these dynamics, we tend to talk in binaries, which I think is okay for context, but we should also talk about them in a way to disrupt them, because sometimes these binaries aren't very helpful to us. But I will say one. But I'll say that, and I'll sort of contradict myself with this next statement by saying that within the Latino community, there is still the paradigm of Black excellence versus white mediocrity. And so we have to understand the truth about that, and understand why it exists. But just because of pop culture, because that's something that I'm always, I think most people pay attention to pop culture at some level. So if you see my background, I'm sharing with you La Borinqueña, which is Afro-Latina, Afro-Boricua superhero that was created by Gallo Miranda Rodriguez. It's been out for about 5 years now. He's done some great work around it. Very social justice focused. Very much created a character based on the whole political and activist trajectory of the Young Lords. It's a wonderful piece. And I also want to kind of cite, another maybe more popular example that a lot of us have paid attention to, which is the new Spider-Man, Miles Morales. But I thought it was an interesting choice in that pop culture, because what they chose, which was to have an African-American parent and a Puerto Rican parent, sort of this is how the Afro-Latina came, which I think is true. I mean, it happens, especially in New York, it happens a lot, right? But I mean, for me, I always thought that sort of story always sort of disrupted my identity a little bit, because everybody always assumed that one of my parents was not.
Right.
Well, both of my parents are Puerto Rican, right?
Right.
And maybe it's because of the way that I look. Maybe it's because, for a part of my youth, I only used my one English surname, right? It could be a lot of different, logical reasons that they thought that. But so when I saw that choice, I have to say this personally, I was a little disappointed. Like I would have loved for like both of the parents of the Black Puerto Ricans, right? La Borinqueña is slightly different. They're both Puerto Rican, but one sort of is a lighter Puerto Rican and the other one's a darker Puerto Rican. And again, I'm not necessarily as disappointed the same way with that one, but it would have been cool to see both of them like typically Black Puerto Rican parents, right? That would have been completely disruptive in a beautiful way. Right, and
was that the new one, the Spider-Man? He was the writer of Spider-Man Into the Universe. Is that the one?
No, Gallo did La Borinqueña. Spider-Man is a part of Marvel, but Gallo's worked he's worked on projects with Marvel. He does a lot of work with Malta Moreno Vega in the Caribbean Cultural Center. He's done some great exhibitions on Black comic heroes, and they had one recently. Actually, the last time I was in New York in February, they had it was called, I want to say it was called The Color of Action or something like that, but it featured all Black comic book characters from different parts of the Black diaspora.
So what's so funny? What you just said is interesting, because that's what made us say Black Latina. So it was the reverse of what you said. So when we started it, Afro-Latina was used, and it's been used for forever, right? It's not new. It's not a new term. I didn't create it, But what happened was, right, when you think about Latinidad, it's all of the, we're all educators, so we know, well, we think we know, right? We said that, William, we think everyone knows what we know. But, the Blacks in the Latin countries are from, South, Central, and the Caribbean, right? Transatlantic slave trade came in. The media always makes it seem like, oh, Amistad, and you watch Roots, and they came all here. No, 1/3 here, 2/3 there, 66%. So most of the people that are from the Latino countries are Black, right? But when, coming from a North American and Northeast perspective, and growing up, like you were saying, Omar, a lot of the inner cities, we were mixing. We were poor. Like Latinos and Blacks were in the projects. Like you go to New York City, you go to Miami, you go to Detroit, you go to LA, that's what you're gonna find. And so when I was thinking of creating the name, it was like, all right, well, everybody says Afro-Latina, and I felt like I was leaving out my sisters who were half and half. And so as I was creating the company and I had members of the company one of the women in particular, her mother is Black from the South and her father's Ecuadorian. So, and Indian, right? And I say that with air quotations, right? Indian, Ecuadorian, indigenous, there's not no African trace there as they know of, right? So she felt excluded. And I was meeting a lot of Black Latinas like that too. And they said, well, by term, we're not Afro-Latinas. So where do we fit? And so I said, you know what? I want to create this umbrella where both women can be inside, both men, because like you said, whenever you say that, people often say, oh, well, does that mean one of your parents is Black? But then if you say Afro-Latina, somebody would say, oh, so where the Caribbean or where from, South America your family's from. And it's not always that's the case.
That's right.
So for us, like, that's why we did that, because both parties feel left out, right? Like you felt, slighted because you felt like for your identity, you're not half African American. And then other people feel slighted because it's like, well, I am. So really that's why we did that. And it's hard, right? It's hard because you just want representation, and you just want to be seen. Like I want to look at myself at the TV and feel like, okay, she has curly hair like me, or she has, and that's really, representation is all that matters. If you don't create, we can't even create a seat at the table. We have to create the table. But that's neither here nor there. I can go on forever about that one. But do any of you have anything else to add to that as far as like the media, Black Lives Matter? Because we can then keep it rolling.
No, I mean, I just, again, just in closing, I just want to say that I agree with Omar, like, and what you're saying, Crystal, like breaking the binary is really important. And, I like to teach history from a non-nation state perspective. That's why I was mentioning Florida, like, chattel slavery in Florida has been going on since the 1500s. And I like teaching about New Orleans history before the United States, purchases before 1803, and there's all these slave rebellions that happen. And I like teaching that to my students. Like John Samaro was a man who was killed because he led a slave revolt before the United States purchases Louisiana. And so I always ask my students, like, so does this Black history matter only after the United States purchases Louisiana, or there's Black history there before? That's important. And the same thing with Mexico and California. There's all this Black history there. And there's Black history in Florida. There's all this Black history that we don't need a nation state to define what's Black history. You know what I mean? And I'm always focusing on, like, I don't know if it's 1619 or 15 something. I don't really know what the dates are. I just know that I like to tell people, so we start Black history in Florida after Andrew Jackson decides to break the law and invade Florida. Should Black history start before the United States invades? And I always love thinking about this agenda of Blackness beyond the nation state. Going back to what Omar's saying, like breaking the binary of what's Black Latino. I don't know what Black Latino is or Afro-Latino is, but whatever it is, we shouldn't rely on nation states to define what is Black. I still very much believe in that agenda of the project of Blackness that very much inspired me when I was in my early 20s, when I was reading about Robin D. Kelly and Black, and that sport Blackness. And even though we can critique Pan-African now, but it still has a place in history. It's a process, right? It's a whole thing. And I really do love anything that can help the project of Blackness is what we should be focusing on, you know.
Yes.
Crystal,
Yes.
I would say one of the things that I'm also following in pop culture, and I see this mentioned earlier in terms of the problematic representation of Blackness on Telemundo, but looking at like how we start to, even in public history, start to create a new canon of Black Latinos. So what I'm basically saying is when we start looking at Latinidad and the inclusion of Black stories, Black narratives, it can't always be about Roberto Clemente and Celia Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have Men Over My Shoulder, you have Schomburg, you have other people, many other people who have contributed to the world, to this country specifically, who need to be part of this narrative. But I think it really, just to close out that thought, is a larger problem where we tend to want to create a canon in the first place, which will never satisfy the needs of people. And so I think, thinking about our good friend Adiana Curtis, who's the Latinx curator for the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Yes, lovely.
She did the great Superstar TED Talk on the TED Women Conference, where she talked about the importance of curating stories of everyday people. And as educators, whether you're a curator, whether you're in the classroom, whether you're in higher ed, we need to do a better job of telling the stories of everyday people.
Yes.
Ooh, I'm gonna jump into what Omar said. We really do, and when I mean everyday people, I need to talk about all types of people, because personally I identify as queer, Afro-Latino. Crystal, you know me personally, but when we talk a lot about these stories, we don't talk about the gay community. We don't talk about trans people, especially, who, you know, they're almost we don't hear about it, but trans women are murdered every day. And that's something that we, maybe not us, but tends to get swept over the rug. But I'm one of those people that when I see like, oh, there's a new movie coming out, I do look for representation. You know, I look for Black people, I look for Black Latinos, I look for queer people, I look for everyone. But my thing is that I'm one of those, I try not to be one of those people that gets, you know, like, oh man, it has to be another straight, you know, male that's doing this, or, you know, like we have a long way to go in terms of representation, is my point. So I'll try not to really nitpick, but we do need to include more queer stories, because that's something that's been swept under the rug, and people think being queer is like oh, we just, you know, sprinkled, you know, some homosexuality here. No, like when we talk about queerness, we have to talk about, you know, the Native Americans. Being two-spirit is something that is, you know, normal to them. But, you know, when we talk about being trans, it's something that's brand new to us. So we really need to talk about all representation, all Black, all shades, all stories, all sides.
So let's get into, well, this is a great segue. So let's get into Latino sexuality in connection to the treatment of women. I think it's a great point for us, since we're speaking about sexuality, to kind of go into, you know, we are in a very male dominant society. Obviously, you guys know that. And so what do you feel about Latino sexuality to begin with? And then we'll go into the treatment of women from there on, and anyone can begin this part.
Oh, I'm just thinking about growing up Dominican, and as soon as you start to like a little bit of dancing, or you start twerking a little bit, you're a boy. Ese se le moja la canoa, and that's a refrán, that's a saying, for, he's gay, something's up with him, he's a little weird. Mm-hmm. So we have to get out of this notion that sexuality is, a tree that just stands still. Sexuality is a spectrum. There are people that like all different types of things. So when it comes to sexuality, in Latinidad, I feel like we have to just get rid of the notion that we are men and women, are supposed to are the standard, because that's really not it. There are people like I've I know lots of stories of married Dominican men who, you know, happy wife, happy life. And then at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, they sneak out to, you know, do what they do at a gay bar, or to go cruise the pier in New York, for looking for the girls, the trans women. And it's just like, you know, we have to do better in terms of that. Like, I could go on, but
anyone else?
I would say, when we were talking about in our sort of like our preliminary conversation and some of the email exchanges we had in preparation for the day, I was really moved by William's story and his honesty about how his youth impacted how he saw women and how he's continued to evolve and develop behind that. And for me, I was really blessed to be able to have my father, who I'm about to celebrate 1 year of his death next month, in my life, and being able to guide me and guide those type of decisions in a way that allowed me to have a healthy respect for women. And I don't say that to toot my horn, because I know that that's not perfect and complete. I know that I engaged in things that that exacerbated and perpetuated patriarchy. I'm definitely not innocent of that. But it's something that I was able to. At least I had some role models in my house to be able to at least see, like, I could happily tell you that as far as my knowledge today, and I'm almost 48 years old, I've never heard the story about my father, cheating on my wife. I've never cheating on my mother. I've never seen him hit my mother. None of that. I never got to see any of that. Thank God, right? That's my personal story, and I think really my larger point is how nuanced our experiences are. And certainly, I think there's a certain trope that people want to promote about Latinos and machismo and things like that. And with every trope, there are elements of truth to that, right? But what it doesn't do is it doesn't teach us about the nuances and the diversity and the complexity of identity, and how our upbringing really impacts who we are. And I take that personally very seriously, not only because out of respect for what my father gave up for me and my sister to be a good provider, but also as a father of 4 children and 2 sons, 2 sons and 2 daughters, right? So how do I pass that along to them? And even take it a bit further, right, to help them understand that we cannot perpetuate patriarchal thinking. We cannot say that women cannot do this, and we can't when they get into like, oh, well, girls are supposed to do this, girls are supposed to do that. Well, we have a larger conversation about what those things mean in terms of our engagement with each other as a family, with the world, and of course, our spiritual base. So we try to take all those things in consideration.
William, you want to share? You have, like Omar was saying earlier, you have some really great stories and feedback on what that means in sexuality. I would love for you to share that with everyone as well.
Yeah. So like I earlier I mentioned my dad, and he was again, he married like the same way he didn't teach me about black, and he didn't teach me about gender equality either, or respecting women in general. So this is a man who married 4 times. I know my dad, he used to be intoxicated or something, and he would talk about his gay brother and how he died of AIDS when he got back from Vietnam, and he would cry about seeing his brother lying on the bed, almost unrecognizable. So it's like a black intimacy, like an intimacy kind of thing. And he resented his brother's sexuality. Like he felt like it took him away too soon. So he would use the faggot word a lot, growing up, and he kind of resented that idea of his gay brother's death, you know, and that's something that I learned from him as being a player, you know, don't, you know, using that kind of word. And to be honest, like me growing up in a group home is, you know, New York, at least as a kid, it was really interesting. You know, I was talking about BET, and that's kind of interesting because growing up in BET, you know, watching BET, we used to see the videos. We all saw those videos, right? The behind shakings and reggaeton videos were very similar. And so women were kind of like bodies that just entertained us, you know what I mean? It was just consumable, you know what I mean? I've never in my core existence understood, you know, respecting Black women in general. Like that wasn't even a concept that I understood. So women were basically bodies that got on the floor and danced in front of videos for a crowd. Women were, especially Black women, were entertainers to be gazed at for visual enjoyment. And so again, like and that's where we got the idea of being a strong Black man, right? The idea of a strong Black man comes from the commodification and ghettoification of Black men. And I'm not gonna lie, we used to have ciphers and project stoops and talk about and boasting about taking a young woman's virginity. You know, that was kind of like, that's what we talked about. Like, oh, I took her virginity. I took her, you know, it was, I mean, we said it a lot more explicitly.
Right.
I'm just saying, I'm keeping it PG-13 here. We would talk about whose penis was bigger, right, in the group home as a way to prove our manhood and power. And I'm not gonna lie, a young woman, because they were also exploring their sexuality and where they fit in the world, were also having sex with us in random houses and random places, you know. So it was, and if a man didn't want to have sex with a woman and she was trying to quote unquote give it up, he would get made fun of, right, as not being a man for doing that. So as I became an adult, I had trouble understanding that a woman could decide not to give me sexual attention. It was just like a really hard concept, like the idea. So like it took me years to understand that a woman has agency. Like that idea, like woman agency, like that, like even when I was in my 20s, like I couldn't understand that idea, you know, that woman could say no, or that woman's agency in her life doesn't have to do around, you know, her meaning in life. They don't have to do nothing with me, you know, that her life mattered on its own regard. You know what I mean? So I always kind of saw woman as like extension of my desires. You know what I mean? So, and I find that interesting, you know, grew up in a group home, which is very different from the way Omar kind of grew up a little bit. And so as an adult, I made a lot of mistakes. And as an adult, I made a lot of dumb mistakes. I've had to sometimes I've talked to certain women that I think I did something problematic. I'm like, yo, I was 21. I didn't, and you know, I think it's important to revisit that with people if you feel like you did somebody dirty, to talk about that with them. However, as an adult, I have seen the Surviving R. Kelly documentary series and the whole Juno Diaz controversy around sexual harassment and so on and so forth. I think those conversations were really important. The only thing I would say about that is that my idea around that is I always think, this is what I think to myself, I guess I'm just putting this on blast right now because it's recording, is that I always think like this is like, I literally say to myself, okay, I think that's important, but do kids in group homes know about that? Do kids in juvenile detention centers know what you're talking about? You know what I mean? Like, do kids, you know what I mean? I always think about that. I always think about how can our ideas of the Surviving R. Kelly documentary, all these important, you know, I think it's a pedagogic tool, right? We need to go to communities and teach that to young Black men in general. And so the issue that I see is like, it doesn't trickle down to them young kids in the neighborhoods. You know what I mean? And so these are kids that are being stopped and frisked. These are kids that are going school to prison pipeline. These are kids, I mean, the amount of Black boys that go to universities, especially heteronormative, cisgender Black men that get a bachelor's degree, ain't that high. You know, so even me being in academic spaces, I don't find that many hetero cisgender Black men. And so that's why it's been really kind of difficult to create coalitions with Black men, because a lot of them are not heteronormative like me. So I kind of remind them of people they grew up with that they don't want to know about, you know? And so I've seen like queer Black folks do writing retreats with Black women. You know, they do all that kind of thing. And so for me, when I'm in conferences with Black folks, it's a kind of weird for us. People like I feel there's a fear of like, if I talk about the importance of Black boys and masculinity, I may be, it's the fears I might get accused of reinforcing heteronormativity. And so there's a weird, like, it's like a double Dutch situation. Like if I don't talk about Black boys or Black Latino boys, then it doesn't get talked about. Because I love the Black Latina movement. I love the Afro-Latina movement. I love all that Black womanhood. And I always think, man, we need to step up. You know, I'm not looking at Black Latina movement and saying, oh, wow, they're including both men and all that. I'm thinking, how could we do the same with our Black boys and create, you know, programming and workshops that is inclusive of transgender folks, you know, that is talking about, going back to what Omar was saying, about really breaking those binaries. Because the way I mean, I grew up hearing people, no homo. Like those are things that people just use. When I worked in the library behind the Schomburg Center, I used to work at the County Canon Library. You know, I grew up with young teenage women, young Black women saying, you know, suck my DICK, right? And I'm like, oh, wow, as an adult, when you hear that, you're like, wow. But those are things that I grew up with, you know what I mean? And so my thing about us educators and those of us that are in activist circles, we have to think about how kids on the ground who don't have some home training, who grew up in the system like me, how could we be better? You know, like how do we like organize around that, you know? Because I feel like, for example, I was talking to Omar earlier about, I've seen a lot of Black radical female organic scholars say F this and Facebook and yo, F that. And I don't feel like Black men can say that so easily. I think we have some some moral conducts that we have, and I respect that. The problem is I don't feel like a lot of young Black men know that. Like you can't be like cursing up a storm and you're trying to be a professional. That's not radical when a man of color who's heteronormative is saying it. You know, you have to come out. There's a certain forms of behaviors that it's almost like a social cultural capital at this point. Like I don't feel like our young Black boys are ready to go out in the world and be a positive force. You know what I mean? And so I'm not defending. I'm not trying to decenter Black women's experiences.
No.
But no, I could do that. I could be doing that. But I am trying to think about the importance of how do we, us educators, you know, how do we go down to the nitty gritty, to the group homes, to the neighborhoods, to the schools, to the workshops. Some people are going to prisons, right? And they're talking about these things. So I find that very remarkable. And I feel like we should learn from people who are going to prisons and group homes and workshops and community organizations and nonprofits who are going down there and really teaching our young Black boys about masculinity. And I like the idea from Mark Anthony Neal, who's a great scholar, who talked about the notion of Black feminist manhood. Basically, the idea is that we need to expose Black men to Black woman writers and the topics around sexism and gender in order to become more sensitized to the reality of what it means to be a woman in society. You know what I'm saying? So then he's basically also, another thing that Mark Anthony Neal talks about his own experience with fatherhood, going back to what Omar was saying, and be able to talk to his daughters about the media industry, so that's what he calls a new black man, and that's the name of his book, New Black Man, where he talks about the idea of Black feminist manhood, and those things are important. I definitely want to talk about misogynoir politics of like anti-Black sexism coming from Black people who say they care about Black communities. And I really feel like the idea of Black trans folks getting killed in neighborhoods is very interesting. It's kind of similar to like Black Latino issues like that. I like reading Black queer literature because it's almost like their Blackness is being denied because of their gender and because of their sexuality. You know what I mean? So it's almost interesting it almost sounds similar to a Black Latino issue. Like, oh, you're not Black. You know, this idea of like de-Blackifying someone because of their gender and sexuality. And so all those things are super important, but the amount of kids right now in our neighborhoods that know about these things, I don't think that number is really high. And I would love to work with people in the future and really figure out how we can do something about that, you know?
So Omar, to kind of tackle, go ahead, I see this, go for it.
Oh no, I love what William was saying. I feel like we really have to go, you know, to our neighborhoods, you know, to the homeless shelters, the youth homes, and we really have to. Well, obviously representation is key, but we have to really speak to them, and you know, let them know just help them get rid of the notion that femininity is bad, because that's the thing. We have that notion. As soon as you see somebody, you know, as soon as you see somebody that, you know, goes like this with their hand, you know, it's behaviors that you see when you see someone walking down the street. You have to get out of that notion that femininity is, you know, it's bad, that being vulnerable is bad. And I feel like now we're doing a better job, slowly but surely. You have people like Bad Bunny, who you know, they like he paints his nails, like just very, in a very, you know, like actual like nails. He like he actually did drag in one of his latest videos, Yo Perreo Sola, and it was an attempt to, I guess, shed light on, you know, on the recent killings of trans women. One of them was called Alexa. If you see the shirt that says no mataron Alexa. I'm sorry if I'm incorrect, but again, we have to just teach our Black boys, our Black Latino boys, that you know, when you think about femininity, you have to be comfortable. You have to feel comfortable with being vulnerable, because we're not really taught that. We're always taught, oh, you know, you got to be a man. You know, like we're back in the plantation field, and it's like, no, you know, we have to really explore all of our feelings and just understand both sides. You know, masculinity and femininity. Those are all behaviors taught by, you know, them. So
like you kind of answered what my next question was going to be, which was how can we build together as a community? And you guys have kind of like shed on that already. If you have anything else to offer in that, you know, you guys have the floor. But the next, I guess my last thought for the summit was changing the narrative for us and our future. How do we continue to educate or push the envelope so that people can know in our respective fields, right? And how do we help people who are ignorant, who don't know? How do we get the point across? Like, what should we do? What should we do for our future as Black Latinos?
For the work that I'm trying to do is utilize the power of place with historic sites, utilize the influence, impact of art from galleries and cultural centers, and then create spaces of intimacy for people to have dialogue. Because dialogue like this are great, but we need like this to be part of who we are more regularly. It cannot happen in blips in the matrix. It has to happen periodically for us to grow and be able to ask those questions and be able to deprogram ourselves from creating value of people based on skin color, you know, gender performance, and other things like that, right? So just like with Altidas's point, with somebody, if a man moves a certain way, that is then valued as bad or even evil, right? How do we have to start having conversations about how do we train our minds so that when we see those things that we don't devalue someone's humanity behind it, regardless of where you stand on that issue. That is the key, right? Because sometimes I think we feel like we can just transform everybody. We're all just going to think alike. And we're all just going to be this one. We're all just going to be robots. It's not going to happen.
No.
That's not going to happen. But what will happen is the ability for us to create value in things that are different from us. We can do that, right? But that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of intentionality. That takes a lot of sacrifice. And we have to, as a society, as a group of human beings, decide whether or not we think that's important enough to do it.
Yeah.
I feel like, oh no, go ahead, William.
No, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. As far as myself, I feel like we really have to get in there and just do the work. Someone in the chat said that it has to start in early spaces and K through 1. Personally, I teach kindergarten at Harriet Tubman, which is in District 9. It's the poorest congressional district in the entire country. So my students are, you know, come from African countries like Ghana, you know, Ivory Coast, and I have Dominican and I have Puerto Rican students. So a lot of Black Latinos and Black students in general. But it has to start from there, because when we teach them, like personally, I taught them, we had a unit called my community, and talking about the different people, the different families that you see. And when I told them, that families look different, like you might have a mom and a dad, or, a grandma, or somebody might live with their grandma, or, you might have a dad and a dad, or a mom and a mom. And they didn't even bat an eyelash, I mean, some of them went, oh, wow, really? But they didn't have that bias that adults have, because, they see a teacher, they trust the teacher. So if you're really disseminating this information early on, they don't have the bias, that we have, you gotta get to them while they're young, and that's why I feel proud that I even though kindergarten is, it's an experience, working with 25 5-year-olds that can barely social distance. It's still, they have that notion of, okay, I had a Black Latino teacher who, he might have moved a little funny. I don't go out and tell them kids, I'm gay, because that's not what I teach, because some people think, I don't, thank God I haven't had that experience. But you don't go, when you notice that a teacher is, I guess, a little flamboyant or different, like some parents might be up in arms, but I haven't had that experience. But my thing is that they don't bat an eyelash, or they don't think twice, because they know that when they were in kindergarten, they had a teacher. And I hope that my kids remember me as a teacher who, Black Latino, who just loved them and embraced everyone, and that they know, okay, I had a Black Latino teacher who's queer, and he's not what I see on TV. He's not what, the negative representation that we see on social media. So essentially we have to get in there, and we have to do the work and just expose them to all types of people.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least for me, like, I feel super, I feel blessed to be with Omar. I know Omar for a couple of years, and he's been a mentor of mine. So that's definitely important too, like on the interpersonal, like your personal, like how you interact with your family members and what you do on a personal level is important, right? Like, you got definitely on your immediate circle, you got to kind of put that narrative out there around your, people around you. But I usually, when I have these conversations, I'm usually around a lot of scholars, like people who are like working on their second book, who are forced to publish or perish, right? They have to publish, and they're kind of being systemically distanced from community. It's not that they want to do it, and they do it a lot of time when they can get a chance to get out to do some kind of programming, and when they can get some money and whatever. But I feel honored to be with educators, see this, and Omar, and all these other folks who are people who are on the ground, because I feel like that's where the future is. It really is, because of Omar, I'm actually not trying to do tenure track. I'm trying to work in communities too, and I think there's two kind of public humanities. There's the Ford Foundation Public Humanities, and there's the Bodega Public Humanities, right? I think a bodega is a social space. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that is a social space to me, and I feel like it's important. Like, I think a museum is important, but I think a bodega is important. I think they're both. I think a group home is important. I think that social space, like a juvenile detention center is important. Like, all these spaces are important to me. I feel like Black spaces get put into very, like, what I feel like what Michael Eric Dyson said when he's like, there's a lot of things happening in the hood. It's not one thing, you know what I mean? There's so many things happening. And I think the future of Black Latina is going to be about really being very attentive to being in Black spaces. I know that's difficult. I know that's not an easy thing to do, but I feel like we have to be the change we want to see in the world. And that took me many years to understand that. Like, we have to be in Black spaces. We have to, like, I've been, when I was at the Schomburg and I was using the bathrooms, and two Black brothers was like, oh, these Dominicans, they don't want to admit they're Black. And so it's like, you start universalizing, and when you see a Black brother, like I see it saying, I'm Black, it's like, it does matter, right? And so I know it's frustrating that we don't get mainstream attention when things happen. Like, I think another thing we have to do is, like, really be part of all Black organizations. We have to, like, we have to align ourselves with Black immigrants, Black American issues, with all kind of Black issues. I'm rooting for everybody Black, because that is the mission for me. Black trans folk who are getting killed and nobody even talking about them. They're like they're necropolitics. Like, there's people who are just disposable Black bodies. I'm like, how is this possible? But that's also that they can make back to Black Bahamian refugees from the Dorian hurricane, who's not getting mainstream attention because they can't get on a half-an-hour boat ride because the United States decides to invade when black Bahamians were already founders of Miami before the United States invades. You know what I mean? Like, these are black people that had transnational histories for a hot minute, and then the United States invades, and now you're immigrants? Like, get out of here. So, like, you know, thinking about black immigrant issues, black American issues may have very particular issues that we have to attend to. We have to be in black spaces that may be very toxic at times. Like, you know, I'm not going to talk about that because we all know we've been to very black spaces that are very toxic at times. And so we have to be in those spaces. I feel like we just have to do that kind of work. It's easy to get caught up with your organization or with some kind of like hanging out with people with PhDs. You know, it's easy to do that. I'm not one of those people who try to divide academics from the community members. I'm not doing that because I know that that's a lot of crossover. But I do really think about, you know, people in the past, you know what I mean? Thinking about people in the past, black folks in the past who have always connected the community with intellectual thought. You know, James Baldwin, like Schomburg, people who always thought about, and like going back to what Omar said, people who don't get recognition, people on the floor who are doing the work. You know, I really feel like that's for the future of Black Latinos. Like, we have to infiltrate every black space possible, because under the idea of self-making, on the idea that black people can do better. You know what I mean? Those old school thoughts that I still feel important. Yes, Pan-Africanism is played out, but the idea of self-making is there. And we wouldn't be talking about that without negritude and Pan-Africanism. And we have to push back against the homophobia of Pan-Africanism. We have to push back against that, or that only black people on different boat stops. No, black people move. Black people move around, and we have to think about blackness in different ways. But I still believe that our Black Latinos, we have to insert ourselves with the idea of self-making, of being in community. I think publishing an article is dope. I think it's great. I published some stuff and I'm like, yeah, that's dope. I know that 90% of people in the community haven't read it. So what am I gonna do about it? At least think about it. At least think about the fact that you wrote an article. I wrote for Latino Rebels. I wrote an article I was interviewed by NPR. That's dope. That's really great. But at the same time, I don't know how kids in the neighborhood, they don't know what we're talking about. And I'm not saying there's no like other forms of knowledges, but I'm saying that back in the day, there were step ladders. There was debating people in the street. You know, if you've been in Harlem, people debate all the time in random streets thinking about blackness. And I love, you know, that's the kind of work I think we need to be doing, you know? That's all I have to say about that one. Sorry, I'm passionate about that.
No, it's okay. I wanted to open the floor up to now our guests who have, well, not our guests, our participants who have any questions or comments or concerns that we didn't address in the chat, or anything direct that you wanted to say or had to address to Alcides or Omar or William before we close. I would love to kind of get some feedback from everyone.
Hey, Crystal, I just wanted to make one thing that William said, or he said a lot of great things, but one thing that I want to just take on real quick before we jump into that is when he was talking about the story about he was in the Schomburg and he heard the people talking about Dominicans, you know, they hate to admit that they're black, whatever. I always find that stunning because almost everything anti-black that I learned from was from African Americans, not from Puerto Ricans. I didn't learn how to stay out of the sun because I didn't want to get too dark from my family. It was from my black American friends, right? We didn't do the dozens about whose lips were bigger with black Puerto Ricans or black Latinos. It was with the African Americans. But yet Afro Latinos are the ones who hate being black. And so it's just, you know, that's how white supremacist works. It sneaks in that way and it divides, and then we're sitting here playing oppression Olympics over who's more anti-black than the other person.
Mm.
That's such a good point. It's the whole idea of divide and conquer. It's always been that way. Someone says so powerful, Omar. Does anyone have any questions, any comments that they want to share or ask the speakers? You can do so now. If you can raise your hand in the app, I can unmute you, and then you can speak to Omar or William or Alcides or myself if you're interested. While I wait for anyone to say anything or have any, there's a question. Daryl. Yes, Daryl.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your comments today. I found it to be very informative. Took some notes. I was wondering if there were any recommended resources that we can check out. I'm particularly interested in thinking about Black feminist manhood in a Latinx or Afro-Latinx or Black Latinx context. Anything that could sort of help in that line of inquiry, but also I'm just really curious to know what you guys are reading in general. If you know, whether it's literature that has nothing to do with race that you're just reading for fun, or if it's something that you're looking at more closely for a paper you're writing or whatever. I'm just curious also to know what you guys are reading, if you're reading anything.
Well, as far as me, I'm currently reading the book "It Didn't Start with You" by Mark Wallen. It's not exactly geared towards race. It's more about trauma that we ourselves carry, and how intergenerational trauma carries on and it affects us. So I feel like even though that doesn't have to do with race, it's a human issue, because all of us have trauma to some extent, especially being Black. So there are a lot of things that we may not know how to process, like, the book talks a lot about how we view our parents and how we have to let things go in order to progress. So that's a book that I'm reading. It's really great. It has exercises, and I definitely recommend it.
The book that there's two books that I started recently. One was the History of the Young Lord by Joanna Fernandez, which is a long coming book. She's been working on that for a long time. She's also curated the exhibition Presente, the Young Lords of New York, that was out in 2015. It was at the Bronx Museum of Art, Museo del Barrio, at Loisaida Cultural Center. And then I think she also curated another one that connected the Panthers to the Lords, that was in the Black Cultural Center in the campus of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I would recommend. She's a scholar activist through and through. She's one of the lead people who are pushing for the freedom of Mumia Abu-Jamal. Then the other one I kind of started now is trying to remember the title. The book on racial scripts by Isar Godreau. It talks about Blackness in Puerto Rico. I'm doing, in preparation for my my dissertation. I'm building my bibliography and trying to make connections with Afro-Latino, Afro-Puerto Rican identity, and kind of breaking down the nuances of how it manifests on the island compared to how it manifests in the diaspora. And ultimately, what I want to write on is how is Afro-Latinx identity represented in museum exhibitions through collections, material cultures, public programs, and exhibitions.
So that's a great question. And that's a great question about anything on Afro-Latino queer identity. It is very scarce. That is very true. I'm the first person the first work I'm thinking about is obviously a book called Erzuli's Skirt. Erzuli's Skirt was written by Ana Marine Lara. And Erzuli's Skirt is really interesting story about, it revolves around three women, the Dominicans, and there's a lot of migration and trying to exploring a lot of topics. So Erzuli's Skirt is one of them. The other one is another book, Geographies of Home by Loida Maritza Perez. It's another really intense book about sexuality and migration. So Geographies of Home is definitely a much recommended book. So those are really two good references to talk about that comment. But also, it doesn't necessarily deal with queerness, but it deals with sexuality and gender in a way. And again, that goes back that's a great question. And the answer to that is I don't really think there's that much work in Afro-Latino queerness, and that needs to change. And so that is a great comment, and that's something to keep spreading around and teaching younger folks and ourselves to kind of spread and make a call to action to really kind of create that kind of literature. I remember E. Patrick Johnson, who's a famous queer studies scholar. He focused on queer studies, and somebody who does like trans work, you know, more like trans work, and they were like, and E. Patrick Johnson's like, I'm happy younger generations are questioning my work or rethinking my work in trans ways. But when I was in Black studies, there was no such thing as queer studies at all. And so it is a process. Like queer studies has a lot to do with gender studies, and then there's trans studies, and there's a big academic process to that. You know what I mean? And so there is a process, and the process we are in is mostly like gender studies, Black womanhood. I think what's the other book? Venceremos by Jafari Allen, which is about Black queer Cubans. Venceremos is a good book, but again, the field is still very scarce with having that kind of book. And right now, in terms of what I'm reading a lot of things. I'm finishing my dissertation. I'm trying to get my PhD next year, so I'm reading a lot of work, a lot of books. But one thing that I'm reading is the Black Museum movement, from storefronts to museums, which focus on how Black communities created museums from the community that became the Anacostia Museum. And the argument is a white woman, but still, the book is dope. The author argues that Black communities created museums and influenced the civil rights movement, not the other way around. Or there's a confluence of how communities created museums and public spaces that accelerated or were like meeting spots for the civil rights movements to thrive. So the Black Museum movement, especially in Chicago and other places, is really an interesting book. Because going back to what I talked about, it's like this idea of public humanities. When white folks talk about public humanities, they're talking about the Ford Foundation. They're talking about museums. And when we talk about public humanities, we're talking about museums, bodegas, communities, random spots, God knows where. So I think that the Black Museum movement is very much connecting community and institutions.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments or questions before we end this awesome summit? Okay. Go ahead.
Well, I had some questions. So first of all, this is awesome. So Lewis and Asher, actually my personal friend Lewis invited me here, and I'm actually very happy I came. So I am identified as being Black American, and I think like it was really needed because I actually texted on the side, like even hearing Black be used so often by people that do not identify as like Black American, but it's Black Latino, like I can feel almost like I've never heard Blackness used. Yeah, Crystal's like, yeah, and it's like, so I think like acknowledging and continuing that work, because I'm like, oh, so there are, okay, so Black is just, there's many others besides Black.
Yeah. It's almost as if not negative, but you're not used to that space.
I'm not used to like hearing just Black, and it's like, okay, so it's like it's just different. And so like my question, like I think it stems from so I think I put in the comment, like I do a lot of work within sexual violence, and actually I think a good book for understanding like just the proximity of like Blackness and how it relates to women and feminism is actually called Hood Feminism. I actually was reading about how like white women's desire to be sexually free hurts the Black and Latino women because like we are over sexualized. So Hood Feminism is amazing. And I know William, you're talking, I was like, yeah, we could talk, because Hood Feminism is my book. I call Lewis and Asher every night, like, bro, this chapter right here. But so there were like two things that happened in 2020, and it's like, I would really just like some light, because I'm someone who, it's like, again, I do like sexual violence, and I think I'm someone who's like, if this is our topic conversation, this is it. So like when the young woman, Vanessa, who was in the military, was murdered, right? It was like, again, I don't, like, she could have been any color. She was someone that was sexually assaulted and then killed. She could have been any, I don't like, not say I don't care, but it's like, I don't care, like, this is wrong. And I started seeing one day people saying like, you can support and not be anti-Black. And almost, I feel like this happens a lot. And I was talking to my friend again, Lewis, when Jerome won his award, and an article came out that was like, Black Americans won, but where are Latinos? And like, he even said like, he knew I was gonna call him, because I'm like, well, this is the problem. Like, I feel like there are situations where instead of let's be mad that this happens to people, it's almost a narrative of like Black Americans and then like Black Latinos or the Latino community, it's like, well, they're getting this and you're not, or vice versa. And so like, how do you have these conversations and continue like, well, the goal is this person was sexually assaulted and killed. The goal is we all, as we said before, as Black people need more, not just representation, like more roles, more, I don't know who said it before, I think she might've left, like we need to be the writers, we need to be the producers. And I feel that sometimes we have these like tricks where someone says one thing and then everybody starts arguing. And, you know, I just personally, as someone who's Black American, I want to do better and not like falling for the trick of like, dang, like, how is it like there are 400 awards, we won 5 out of 400. Like, so if someone, or if you can shed light on like what I can do to like, or what we can do to continue like the goal of the conversation. Like the goal is like this, like again, this woman was killed. What are we doing to address that? Because right now we're just arguing over who should care when we all should care. So I don't know if that question made sense. Like that is just like something I want to know how I could do better as my role as someone who, because we are within the Black community. I think one other comment I have that I have been understanding as I've gotten older is that I think, and I put it in the chat, like Blackness is just it's like your proximity. I have friends who are Black Dominicans, who are immigrants, who are everything. And I think what I notice about when we talk about Black, it's like because I think it's the same as someone talks about colorism. My older brother is like very fair skin with green eyes. People see him think he's white. So his proximity to Blackness is different from mine. So I think when we deal with a lot of issues within this beautiful and very diverse Black community, I think it's addressing sometimes what are experiences in it and understanding like it might be a different experience, but again, the goal is here. So yeah, my question is just like, how can we continue to do the work and kind of dissolve like the arguing back and forth over who should care about what? I'm sorry.
I'm looking at the guys like,
no.
I'm like, should I say something? Should the guy say something? Because
no, that's a great question, and I've been wrestling
really
with that question for years. Something that I recommend. I mean, again, it's a white author, but if it doesn't matter to you. It's called Ethnicity Without Groups. I don't agree with everything in the book. This guy called Rogers Brubaker, Ethnicity Without Groups. So I can just summarize it for you. I mean, basically, the idea of ethnicity without groups, what that means is that that we have been conditioned at this point to think about groupism politics. And I'm not gonna say identity politics is bad. That's what white liberal folks are like, oh, identity politics. I'm like, yeah, you mean people suffering, you know, but groupism is a thing that we got to be careful with, because groupism is this idea of my group and your group, and then what happens is we don't focus on the institutional. We don't focus on like what are the bigger layers of power, which is what Crystal was saying earlier. Is like what are the bigger, where are the spheres of power? And I don't want to limit power to Marx, or power can be a lot of things. Power could be in a group home. Power could be happening a lot. But the bigger powers, like why are these Black boys in a group home to begin with? You know what I mean? Like what is happening? If you were like, it's like a top down, a bird view, like what is happening? And so when we don't think in not in just groupist terms, we start looking at what are the big, you know, how is the criminalization of Black bodies both causing Black immigrants to be illegally searched and all that, and how that's contributing to the Jim Crow and the Jane Crow. Like I can make a connection between Jim Crow, Jane Crow, and how the immigration system has been illegally and persecuting Black immigrants more than any other group, even though they're the smallest group of immigrants, right? So I'm thinking, oh, the criminal justice system is persecuting Black bodies. And the way I can do that is because I look at the institutional. But I know that on the ground, things can get very groupist thinking, like, oh, it's a group, my group versus your group. And I think that that's a good book, called Ethnicity Without Groups. I don't agree with it, a lot of it, but some of it is really tight when he talks about ethnicity without groups. It's like, how can we think about identity without just being about groupism? And the other one is a good book. I read it years ago. Ooh, I can't remember. It's called Cruel Optimism. Cruel Optimism is a really good book by Laurent Berlant. And, you know, it's like a cruel optimism is like, and that's just a concept, you know what I mean? I think it's a good book I recommend. But I think also my last comment is like, so white liberals tend to romanticize Black communities, and then white bigots tend to demonize Black communities. I say we should look at Black communities for their complexity, think about the institutional ramifications around Black bodies. You know what I mean? And so because I grew up in Black spaces where it wasn't, I don't romanticize, because look, for example, when I was in a group home, I had a guy called Greg, and Greg was a Black American boy, and Greg used to let me borrow his clothes, because we didn't have clothes for 5 days. In high school you have to use normal clothes, and Greg used to let me use his clothes, but I used to steal his clothes even when he didn't want me to use it. And so that's interesting, because other kids in the group home were trying to beat the crap out of me. And so when I was a kid, I never thought that Black people were one thing. I always thought that Black people were like, you can either be Greg and let me use your clothes, or you can try to beat the crap out of me and take my cigarettes. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like I thought about Black people in one way. And so for me, I love thinking about Black multiplicities, Black what is the Black, but also thinking about the institutional and not only falling for groupist thinking. That was my take.
Well, I am gonna say something and not keep it just about the guys just for this second, because I am the only female, and I am a writer and producer, and I think that was the beginning of one of the comments, that the beginning of your question. So there's a space to be in, right? And so my space, we have these multiplicities as women. We have these layers to us. And so being in this space, you have to be able to be everything, but be nothing. And so for me, it's like, being a writer, right? When you write, I never say, because I say I'm a Black Latina, I never say what kind of Black Latina I am. And the reason why I don't, and not that I'm not proud, I'm huge, proud Puerto Rican, proud Jamaican background, very proud of that. But for me, someone was saying how Peruvians and Mexicans, they have different experiences. And so for me, it's not about the what makes us different. It's what makes us the same. So again, behind creating Black Latina, while my experience is different from being in New York and being a New Yorker and having Jamaican and Puerto Rican background, is going to be different from my sister in Cuba. The fact that we look a kind of way and we don't fit into this box of what society thinks we should look like brings us together. So I don't necessarily focus on what makes us different. As a writer, I'm a Latina writer, I'm a Black writer, but I'm also a female writer. So having that Pan-Africanism within me and having those double, triple consciousness. So I write for you. I write for my other Latinas. I write for my African American sisters. I write for my African sisters, but I'm also a woman, so I also write for women. So in one of the plays we have called Of Mothers and Men, it's 9 monologues about women, and one of the women goes through a molestation. And anyone who comes into the show can appreciate that. If you're a white woman, if you're Asian, if you're whatever, and you've been molested, you can understand what that trauma is like. But within the realm of this is coming from an Afro-Latina, Black Latina's experience. And I think as women, we oftentimes don't get that ability to just be many things. We have to then fit into a box. And so that's always been my push, is to say, hey, listen, it's not one thing. We can be different things and we can affect different people in a group as humans and be people. But also understand that we also come from this background and not taking that away, because then people will say, oh, well, you're trying to sell out or you're being one way. And that's not always easy. But then again, being a woman in America has never been easy, right? So yes, I hope that answered your question. I know there's someone else. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And like I said, I think definitely to your point, William, the groupism is definitely, I think I didn't have the term for it, but I think that is the term that we do. I think, Crystal, to your point, just being able to be everything and the general consensus, I think that's where I guess my mind frame is, because a lot of times when I see these things happen, I'm like, why are we arguing? Why? To me, William, no, because I'm very this makes no sense as to why we're fighting when this is the issue. But I think it's to your point, where so many of our identities are not allowed to exist at one point, so we can't say, we are women. This is a women's issue.
That's it.
It's everyone's issue, because if you have any proximity, which you do, to women gender X, Y, and Z, you should care.
You came
so I
out of
definitely,
a woman. You came out of a woman.
You should,
so
you
it
should
should be. Yeah.
And I don't want to pronounce your name wrong. Yes.
I'll see this.
Like, to your point, I think with, again, like, understanding, because it's making me now think about how, as the Black community, we lack supporting the transgender community, and like understanding that it's like, this is everybody's thing. So I'm going to like definitely, Crystal, take that back to be like, I think sometimes we pick like, well, you're not this, so you can't talk about it. It's like, I might not be this, but I'm this. So
right. And someone just said, yeah, but you can't speak for them. You speak for your experience. Right. I speak for my experience, but we're human. So in some way, shape, or form, we can find the thread in our experience. I can't speak for everyone else, but as a human being, we have to find, and that's the problem. That's what continues to separate us, is to say, well, she don't understand what I'm going through because she don't know my experience, or he doesn't know. There's got to be a way where, because here's the thing too, we're human, and there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. And we need to understand how to be empathetic, even if we don't know the experience. We have to be empathetic to another person and say, this is a person, this is a woman that got killed. It doesn't matter where she's from, who she is, what she looks like. And I think that's also, you know, what makes it important too.
And I think that, because I saw that, and again, I'm not on the panel, so I'm going to be quiet. But I think just to end like my question in that comment, because I'm a writer as well, and I think, again, this is where one of the comments, I'm like, I'm friends with people from all over. Yeah. And I think the problem is actually what someone said, like how they said you can't speak for them, but you're not going to. I tell people, I'm not giving you a voice, you have that, I'm giving you the space. Yeah. So I think that's the thing. Like, I would never speak for someone who is, for example, a Black, like me and Crystal were talking, you're a Black Latina. I don't know what that looks like, but I can give you the space to tell me what it is and understand and look at shared experience. And I think when we're still in this mindset of you're speaking for someone, or you're having like, and it's like, I tell people, I don't talk for anybody. I'm just giving you the space and the platform. And I think maybe actually that comment helped me again realize maybe that's what we're missing. I think we're missing the space and the platform. So thank you though, all of y'all. I wrote down those book recommendations, and again, Hood Feminism is a great book, and I totally recommend it. William's like, I will read it because it sounds awesome.
Oh, thank you. I think there's another person who has a comment, so let me unmute them. If you could, yeah, unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Astrid.
Hi, Astrid.
Oh, you look Astrid. Sorry.
I know, I'm cute. No, what's up to my Dominicanos, my Platanos, my Haitianos, you know. But my question centers more on how do we bridge the gap? So what we deal with as immigrants a lot is like, once we come here, we're no longer enough of a Dominican, enough of a Haitian, because one of the bigger things is like, when we come here, we have to focus so much on learning the language so well, we forget about our own language. Or our parents will be like, oh, si no está escribido en español, no me lo mandes. You know, I only read in Spanish. So how do we bridge the gap of being an American, you know, Latinx, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, all, you know, you fill in the blanks, with our people at home, you know, also, you know, educating them, because you know how our folks are. It is hard to teach parents because they are supposed to know more than you do. So especially our older folks. So that's really what primarily my question is like, how do we work on that, on bridging that gap between the people here and our people back at home?
Crystal, I would say, I think that's a great question, Astrid. And for me, when I engage with people that I'm trying to bridge that gap, which is beautifully said, is try to create, we have to learn as educators and just as advocates to do a better job of just questioning, framing questions, right? Instead of trying to teach at them, pontificate, quote books, quote websites, like just frame a question that's an essential question that means that they're going to have to be pricked in their minds to think twice, right? If they think even a simple question like, why have you always thought that way? Like, where did you learn that, right? Where did you learn? Like, you know, with my parents being Puerto Rican, like I remember hearing them talking negatively about Dominicans, and I had no idea why. None. I had no idea why, right? And as I got older, and I moved to New York for a little while, and I worked in the South Bronx, and I lived in Brooklyn, and I saw like the deep sort of beef, right, happening with New Yorkers and Dominicans who are in New York, and I was like, what is this? But all that, so why? And then I asked them, like, why does that exist? No one can tell me. And so if you can't answer that simple question, wouldn't you think twice about promoting that type of thought? Like wouldn't you think twice about it, right? So I think we just have to learn. This is something that I know that I need to grow into. I'm just trying to learn how to frame questions strategically to get people to dig deeper and to question and interrogate their own thoughts and processes instead of me having to kind of always like pontificate to them.
Ooh, Omar, I'm gonna jump off. I'm gonna piggyback right off what you said because I have that problem too, where I feel like when I'm in spaces, you know, with people, whether I just met them or people that are friends of mine, I'm always I guess they want to say the woke one, the one that wants to fact check. So for me, I have to get into the habit of asking questions instead of speaking at people because people don't like that. The ego, people do not like to be told that they're wrong. So it's more like you have to get into the habit of, okay, well, why do you think this? Why is this, you know, the way it is? And what do you think about this? So you can kind of gauge them, you know, to the right direction. It's a gift as an educator to be able to, you know, ask questions because through doing a lot of questioning, you eventually get to your own perspective, you know? So, I forgot what I was gonna say, but Omar, I definitely agree with you. Astrid, as far as a resource, I want to recommend this. It's a PDF file. It's like 70 pages. It's called Introduction to Dominican Blackness. It was written by Dr. Silvio Torres Sayan, who I sort of grew up with him because my mom, who graduated from City College, she worked for the Dominican Studies Institute. So I had a chance to kind of meet him, great scholar. But essentially the book, it talks about, you know, literally before colonization, the Tainos and what happened, and how, you know, white elitism, you know, kind of they were because of white elitism, we had to kind of rewrite history. And but it's a great resource. It's I think if you type it in Google, it should pop up. Intro to Dominican Blackness by Dr. Silvio Torres Sayan. I really recommend it. I sent it to my mom and my stepfather, and you know, it's a learning process. You kind of have to just give people the resources and hope that they want to educate themselves and read.
I agree with Omar, and I see this a lot. I mean, that's a perfect. I would only add that, you know, because I was born in Puerto Rico. I did some elementary school there. I did my bachelor's there. I went to college there. I worked in Burger King there. I worked in a supermarket out there. You know, I did I did a little bit of middle school, and I'm still not Puerto Rican enough for them. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm not Puerto Rican enough for them. And I'm like, wow, what else? Like anybody in Puerto Rico, if you spend more than 2 weeks out of Puerto Rico, you're no longer Puerto Rican to them. And I mean, I'm joking about it, but you might as well, because it's, for me, when I was in Puerto Rico, a lot of New Yorkers and stateside Ricans, they didn't want to speak English. They were embarrassed about it. And I was like, why? They're like, oh, because, you know, people start looking at me weird. I'm like, wait, let them look at you weird. You know what I mean? Because I'm not going to exclude 3 million Puerto Ricans in the diaspora, whatever the number is, to make this guy feel good about it, you know? It's just, for me, like, I've always, this is surprising, like, I know a lot of people in the stateside Ricans who didn't want to talk English. I remember I was in a campo, I was in a mountain somewhere in Puerto Rico, and this guy looks at me, he looks, you know, like he looked like a mountain person. I was in Mocha, and this guy says, oh, are you Dominican? And I was like, that's weird, because island Puerto Ricans never asked me that. Only stateside Puerto Ricans asked me that ridiculous question. Just because of my phenotype, you know, like, oh, you can't be Puerto Rican because of your phenotype. I mean, I love being called Dominican. That's a blessing. But just getting asked from a Puerto Rican is not a compliment, but not from them. But I asked him, like, oh, you're not from here. Are you from the United States? And he's like, yeah, I'm from the United States. Like, no wonder you call me Dominican. So, but like when I was in Puerto Rico, people call me gringo. I'm like, whatever, call me whatever you want, because I'm not gonna abandon 3 million Puerto Ricans in the United States or Hawaii or wherever. Like it's not. There's a little bit of resistance that has to happen, and I'm like, I understand why Puerto Ricans who are from the diaspora may want to like acclimate, but people who helped me live in Puerto Rico when I was 20 were actually, most people were from New York, from the United States. I used to hang out with a lot of New Yorkers out there in Puerto Rico, and I'm not pro statehood or anything, but I was proud of speaking English because that's the language I spoke. Because a lot of Puerto Ricans spoke English, and I'm a little bit of Miguel Piñero, who's like the famous Puerto Rican spoken word activist, who said, "Don't bury me in Puerto Rico, bury me in the Lower East Side." I'm a little bit like that, where I'm not gonna ask permission from island Puerto Ricans for me to be Puerto Rican. I'm a little beyond that. I still get treated like I'm a stateside Rican. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. But the fact that I spent my Puerto Rican Spanish is island Spanish. I speak island Spanish. And the fact that they know that I can speak English, they already like, no, papi, ya tú no eres puertorriqueño, papi, ya tú no eres boricua. I'm like, really? That's crazy. That's interesting. And I've had to resist this idea that I'm going to abandon the diaspora for the island. I want to determine what Puerto Rican means to me. I don't want getting pressured by island Ricans or to tell me what it is.
I love it. Does anyone else have anything else? Anyone else have any other questions? Let me see. No? All right, fellas. Well, do any of you have any closing remarks? Anything you want to say before we close out for today? Oh, wait. There's a hand up. Oh no, it was Astra. She was still there. Does anyone have any closing remarks?
Thank you for this, and we should do it again.
Did you put your social media in the chat so they could follow you? Everyone's social media could be in there, and we could continue to follow each other.
Yeah, I put my IG and my Twitter handle, so follow me, I follow back.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. These amazing men have been good friends of mine for many, many years. And like I said, they are allies in the movement. They are part of the movement. The movement keeps on moving, and we continue to grow together. This is the end of our summit today. You can continue to follow all these great men, myself, Black Latina movement, for the next events that we have, for the next events these gentlemen have coming up. And we really thank you and appreciate you for your comments, your questions, your concerns, sharing, and continuing the conversation going of what it is to be Black Latino in America. Thank you all so much. And
thank you so much, everybody.
We'll see each other on social media.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Have
Bye,
a
everyone.
Saturday. Bye.